the tiny island that controls Asia. This island is smaller than New York City. It has no oil fields, no huge population, and almost no natural resources. Yet, China depends on it, Japan depends on it, India depends on it, and some of the world's most powerful shipping companies can't afford to ignore it. Because sitting at the southern tip of Asia is a tiny island that sits beside one of the most important choke points on Earth, Singapore. And here's the part most people don't realize. Singapore doesn't control Asia because it is big. It controls access because of where it is. And if something went seriously wrong in the waters around Singapore, the consequences wouldn't stop at Southeast Asia. They could reach China, India, the Middle East, and the global economy.
So, how did one tiny island become one of the most important pieces of geography in the world? The answer begins with a strait. Look at a map. Between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, there is a narrow maritime corridor, the Strait of Malacca. It connects the Indian Ocean with the Pacific through the waters between the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra.
And Singapore sits directly beside its eastern end, at the entrance to the Singapore Strait. This geography is incredibly valuable, because ships traveling between the Middle East, India, and East Asia can use this route instead of taking much longer alternatives. And the numbers are extraordinary. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, in the first half of 2025, about 23.2 million barrels of oil passed through the Strait of Malacca every day, roughly 29% of global seaborne oil flows. It was the world's largest oil transit choke point. And around 100,000 vessels transit the combined Malacca and Singapore Straits each year. So when people talk about strategic choke points, this is one of the places they're talking about. But there's a problem. A choke point is powerful because it can also become vulnerable. Imagine you're China. Your factories need energy. Your economy depends on imported commodities. And a huge amount of your maritime trade passes through a narrow corridor, thousands of kilometers away from your mainland. That creates a strategic vulnerability. China even has a name for this problem: the Malacca Dilemma. If a major conflict disrupted the strait, ships could be delayed, insurance costs could rise, energy supplies could be threatened, and supply chains could be forced onto longer routes. There are alternatives. Ships can use the Sunda Strait or the Lombok Strait, but these routes are generally less direct and come with their own limitations. So geography creates a strange paradox. The strait is incredibly valuable, precisely because there are only a limited number of practical alternatives, and Singapore sits right next to it. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Singapore doesn't have to own the oil to become powerful. It doesn't have to produce the cargo to profit from it. It simply needs to become the place where global shipping stops, refuels, transfers cargo, repairs, finances, and connects to the rest of the world. And Singapore has done exactly that. In 2025, the Port of Singapore handled a record 44.66 million TEUs of containers. It also recorded 57.77 million tons of marine fuel sales. Singapore is also connected to more than 600 ports worldwide, and roughly 90% of its container throughput is associated with transshipment. In other words, Singapore doesn't simply move its own goods. It helps move everyone else's goods. That's the genius of the island. It turned geography into an economic machine. And Singapore isn't finished. Look west to Tuas Port. This is one of the largest port projects ever undertaken by Singapore. The vision is enormous. When fully developed in the 2040s, Tuas port is planned to have a handling capacity of around 65 million TEUs per year. And it is designed to become the world's largest fully automated container terminal. Why build something this enormous?
Because Singapore understands one simple rule. Trade routes change, ships get bigger, supply chains become more complicated, ports compete with one another, and geopolitical tensions can suddenly redirect global commerce. The Red Sea crisis demonstrated exactly how quickly shipping routes can change. When vessels avoid dangerous waters, ports elsewhere can suddenly experience surges in demand. Singapore isn't simply waiting for the future. It's building infrastructure for it. Now look north. China is one of the world's largest trading economies and one of the biggest users of the Malacca route. Energy from the Middle East, LNG, raw materials, and manufactured goods all move through the wider maritime network. That makes Singapore strategically important to Beijing. But there is a second layer. Singapore itself is not China. It is an independent state. And it has strong relationships with the United States, China, India, Japan, and Europe. That makes it something incredibly valuable in geopolitics, a connector. Singapore doesn't need to choose one superpower. It can trade with all of them. And that is one reason why the island has become such an important diplomatic and economic hub. But the United States also understands the importance of this geography. Because controlling the Pacific isn't only about aircraft carriers. It's also about logistics, fuel, shipping, and access. And Singapore sits at the intersection of all four. Now we reach the dangerous part. What happens if the Strait of Malacca is disrupted? It doesn't necessarily have to be a war, a collision, a major accident, piracy, a geopolitical crisis, or a military confrontation. Could create enormous disruption. And that's why the Malacca and Singapore Straits are not merely commercial waterways, they are strategic infrastructure. The U.S. Energy Information Administration identifies Malacca as the primary oil choke point in Asia, and Singapore's own government has emphasized that the Malacca and Singapore Straits are critical international waterways connecting the Indian and Pacific Oceans. That means their security isn't just a Singaporean concern. It's an international one. Because when a choke point carries enormous volumes of energy and cargo, the choke point itself becomes part of geopolitics. But there's a catch. Singapore doesn't literally control the Strait of Malacca. The strait is bordered primarily by Indonesia and Malaysia, with Singapore at the southern end of the maritime system. International navigation rights also apply. So the title, "The Tiny Island That Controls Asia," isn't about political control. It's about something more subtle. Influence. Singapore controls very little territory, but it has built enormous influence around the movement of goods. Think about it. A ship arrives. It needs fuel. It needs services. Its cargo may need to be transferred. Its owner may need financing. Its crew may need support. Its cargo may need insurance. And Singapore has built an ecosystem around almost every part of that process. That's why the island matters. It doesn't need to stop the ships. It needs to make sure the ships want to come here. For centuries, great powers built their influence through armies, then navies, then oil. But Singapore discovered another form of power: connectivity. A tiny island, placed at the right point on the map, can become more important than a much larger country in the global supply chain. Today, Singapore is one of the world's busiest maritime hubs. The Strait of Malacca remains one of the world's most important energy choke points. And the island is building one of the world's most ambitious automated ports. But the real story isn't Singapore itself, it's geography.
Because Singapore proves something that every superpower eventually learns. You don't always need to control the world. Sometimes you need to sit where the world has to pass. And that's why this tiny island matters. Not because it is large, not because it has enormous natural resources, but because billions of people depend on the routes around it. And if the world's economic center of gravity continues shifting toward Asia, Singapore's geography may become even more valuable. So the next time you see Singapore on a map, don't look at its size. Look at what passes beside it: gas, containers, capital, and power. Because this tiny island may not literally control Asia,
But it sits beside one of the few places where Asia connects to the rest of the world. And sometimes that's even more powerful. China can't escape the Malacca Dilemma.